Hey! My drink today is this low-key fucked up iced coffee. As you can see, the instant coffee flakes didn't fully dissolve, but that's okay. So today I would like to talk about horror movies that use rabbit symbolism. Why are rabbits and bunnies and hares used for so many horror movies when surely there must be a scarier animal to use? And more importantly, why can they be so unsettling? Because on paper, rabbits are very cute, so why can they be so eerie and so scary looking? It isn't a coincidence. And to understand one of the reasons why, you can go back to literally one of the most famous stories of all time, the 1865 novel by Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. You definitely already know this story. Like, I think everyone in the English language knows this story by heart. It's very, very popular. It's basically about a young girl named Alice who follows an unusual white rabbit wearing a spectacle and like full clothes, like full outfit, fat and jeans on, falls into his rabbit hole and ends up in a sort of hallucinatory, nightmarish, psychedelic adventure where nothing makes sense, including her own self, and reality just makes no sense. These are some real illustrations from the original book, and I would actually venture to say that this is a quasi-horror book. It's actually very creepy, especially the movie. Like, are you actually kidding me? There's even a part in the book where she's holding a strange-looking baby that transforms into a pig in front of her eyes. And I think that's a pretty dark concept for a children's book, but whatever. But anyways, this theme of the rabbit's hole is such a massive cultural phenomenon. It's actually probably hard to conceptualize how massive it is and how many pieces of media, video games, books, movies, television allude to this rabbit hole. It's so expansive. Follow the White Rabbit colloquially means like follow your curiosity with abandon and childlike bravery and venture into the unknown. But personally, I think it is more of an invitation that you do not have control over receiving, and it invites you to choose between staying in a stagnant current reality or following a rabbit into a transformative journey that may be scary and dark and painful as much as it is transformative. Specifically, the transformation that comes with questioning yourself and exploring the underbelly of your mind, aka your subconscious. The rabbit invites you, and very nonchalantly and with not much hand-holding, to question what is around you and be open to the adventures of anything beyond our immediate reality. So this can be transformative and terrifying, but it's mostly, I think, both. And in Alice in Wonderland, like, it is a children's book, but because it deals with ideas of bending her own mind, like, it does lean into horror because these are pretty dark and heavy concepts even for a child. She goes through like panic and pain and strangeness, and at some point she actually forgets like who she is. So the rabbit hole is not just tied to hallucinatory adventures, but it is very much tied to detaching or distancing yourself from your current reality. Either way you see it, you're not going to be the same afterwards. So during the Alice in Wonderland story, the rabbit is anthropomorphic, which is important. It is always running late and is focused on time, which you can see as like a metaphor for mortality. But the rabbit is not a guide for Alice. It is just an invitation. It is a signifier that something very strange has happened to her world. Rabbits are a symbol and a signifier that reality is bending. They very directly tell the audience or the reader, nothing is what it seems. Personally, I think Alice in Wonderland is so cool because it is a paradox, because you can see the book as a silly way to pass time. It's like a creepy and absurd story that you can kind of see as nothing just makes sense and it's just for fun. But it also brings up some really profound and expansive ideas about questioning the self and what makes up a self, really. So with both sides of that spectrum, the book itself follows the themes of the book. which is really cool and I think really original. So while I would say most horror media depicting rabbits and rabbit holes directly is referencing Alice in Wonderland, I think it's pretty cool that the rabbit symbolism has been very, very consistent over the history of the human race. And it has a spiritual and symbolic meaning that way predates Alice in Wonderland. So rabbits are a prey animal, but the way they're built is very, very interesting and super hyper perceptive. They are constantly aware of their surroundings. They have a very high surface area with their ears and their hearing, but the rabbit also has a panoramic field of vision that is almost 360 degrees. So when we're talking about falling into the esoteric or the unknown, the rabbit is a very perceptive creature. They're crepuscular, don't know if I'm saying that right, but it means that they're lurking around between dawn and dusk, the twilight hours of the night. So that in itself is making them a symbol for the liminal spaces between night and day. And they often sleep with their eyes open, which is very, very creepy. Just biologically, rabbits are a fantastic symbol of venturing from conscious to unconscious. And culturally, because we've raised rabbits for meat and fur, not for milk, but for meat and fur, for so long, they've had an expansive symbolism with humans. Weirdly, they've been used as both symbols of purity and promiscuity on both sides of the spectrum in the Victorian era. And in ancient Rome, the rabbit was depicted as the goddess Venus, but then in the Middle Ages, it was depicted as purity and virginal purity specifically. But what I think is the most interesting is in ancient folklore, the rabbit is consistently seen as the same archetype over multiple cultures. And it's seen as the trickster. So the trickster is a type of character that uses cunning and wit and mischief to break social rules and undermine authority. So the trickster is witty and deceitful, but it is also a great example of the gray areas between good and evil, and it even poses the question, do those exist at all? Lewis Hyde described the trickster as, the boundary is where he will be found, sometimes drawing the line, sometimes crossing it, sometimes erasing or moving it, but always there, the god of the threshold in all its forms. So in Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, there's this ancient folklore of this hare named Kalulu that was seen as the trickster hare. And that's been a figure in their stories for hundreds of years. In Aztec mythology, a pantheon of 400 rabbits represented fertility, parties, and drunkenness. But because the number 400 in the Aztec culture represented infinity, these rabbit deities basically symbolized the limitless, unpredictable ways a person could behave while under the influence. Much like the trickster is uninhabited by social norms, it plays into that trickster archetype. And in indigenous culture in North America, Nanabozo is a trickster hero and cultural figure, and it specifically called out struggles that Native people experience by creating problems, basically. And in Chinese folklore, rabbits often are depicted with a goddess on the moon, just adding into this idea of mysterious and esoteric. And even the idea of the lucky rabbit's foot most likely comes from the Christian idea that a witch would shapeshift into a rabbit as one of her forms, and the true lucky rabbit's foot was if you cut the rabbit's foot off while it was still a shapeshifted witch. So why is the rabbit, symbol of the trickster, so important for these ancient societies? It's because the trickster is crucial. It breaks rigidity and it shows hypocrisy in society by breaking rules. All roads lead back to Rick and Morty, and I will tell you that Rick is a good trickster archetype because he is constantly challenging authority no matter what position he's in and highlighting hypocrisy through challenging authority. So that's just an example. This is also the archetype of the king's jester because he can tell the king harsh truths and the king won't kill him because he's the trickster, he's witty, he's mischievous, but he's able to tell the truth through whimsy. But what is important is the rabbit or the trickster is asking you to also point that mirror towards yourself. But this inward and honest mirror is often very, very, very painful, even though it is transformative. Because the rabbit hole inherently leads to the unknown. The rabbit as a symbol lives on this threshold between what is culturally known to be true in reality, in society, and it invites you to cross that boundary into the liminal, the unknown, the subconscious, something much more gray and undetermined, which is inherently way scarier than just living in reality. Carl Jung believed the trickster to be a very real psychological entity, like a thing that could possess you, basically. And he said about the trickster, the so-called civilized man has forgotten the trickster. He remembers him only figuratively and metaphorically. When irritated by his own ineptitude, he speaks of fate playing tricks on him or of things being bewitched. He never suspects that his own hidden and apparently harmless shadow has qualities whose dangerousness exceeds his wildest dreams. So this is unsettling because it asks you to not only abandon your current reality, but turn the mirror onto yourself with fresh eyes. So in horror, the introduction of the rabbit, whether that's a costume or a physical rabbit in the scene, is so creepy because unconsciously you've been collecting this sort of rabbit symbolism information without even knowing it. And when you're watching a movie with rabbit imagery and symbolism, you are unconsciously looking inward towards yourself. In HOKUM, which scared the shit out of me, I was so scared during this movie. The rabbit is a very distorted host of a TV show that the kid saw when he was like 5. So he's basically seeing this terrifying imagery of this rabbit television host because it is blended with the time that he accidentally shoots and kills his mother while he's playing with the gun, and the gun goes off and shoots her in the face. The TV show host that he saw when he was a child was obviously not a rabbit, but not only is it physically unsettling that it is a rabbit, but it is signifying to the main character, the author, that reality is not under his control anymore. It is inviting him to address this trauma in a decidedly mischievous, very abrasive and creepy way, much like the typical rabbit trickster that we see in folklore. And this rabbit hallucination is the turning point in HOKUM where it becomes a survival movie. Like it really ramps up after this hallucination, where suddenly after this hallucination, he fully accepts that witches are real and hell is right underneath him. So in this instance, the rabbit is telling him and the viewer that you are no longer in control and you cannot repress this trauma any longer because I'm literally bridging the two realities right now. It also ties into the dead body in the elevator wearing the rabbit costume, and the rabbit costume quite literally being the dirty laundry, evidence of a killer, is a symbol of repressed shadow behaviors that are trying to stay hidden, like Carl Jung is talking about. So as the trickster, the rabbit is right there at the threshold in every single way. And as an audience, we kind of dislike this concept because reality being able to be bent and shifted makes us extremely uncomfortable, obviously. Because like in HOKUM, for example, bringing up repressed trauma that you're putting in your shadow self or your subconscious can be extremely painful, or introduce you to darkness that you're trying to keep from yourself. So one of my favorite movies of all time is Donnie Darko, and there's famously rabbit costume in here named Frank. A lot of people believe Frank to be like a psychopomp, which is basically an angel of death that guides someone into the afterlife. I personally think that the rabbit costume is a catalyst for Donnie's regular life to become much shakier, and it is basically just telling Donnie that reality is bending where he's at right now. And when he accepts this invitation from the rabbit to fall down the rabbit hole, he does this, falls down the rabbit hole about time travel and about the shifting of reality. And most importantly, the rabbit doesn't force him to do anything. It literally is just telling him what is going to happen. It is a signifier that the threshold is near. And in the end, Donnie chooses to sacrifice himself to correct the way the universe was supposed to go. And he is basically like an anti-hero. So the rabbit in Donnie Darko is a symbol to the audience that reality has become malleable and that fate is bending, but also fixed. So it's a really complicated, really cool movie. I'm pretty sure Richard Kelly said that Watership Down was the inspiration for this rabbit. So in another rabbit-centered horror movie, Us, by Jordan Peele, the movie begins with cages full of rabbits. And one of the main characters wears a shirt with a rabbit on it twice, because one of the shirts means rabbit in Vietnamese. There's a stuffed rabbit in the cabin. Rabbits are hopping around everywhere. And one of the final scenes has somebody holding a rabbit. So there's lots of rabbits in Us, like a lot. So obviously in this movie, they are a very obvious symbol for the subconscious, the underbelly, the dark spots of reality. They're hanging out everywhere on this threshold between these two universes. And that's like natural for a rabbit to be. This film is about investigating the deeper levels to our reality, like the inner racism. So rabbits, again, are asking the characters in Us, but most importantly the viewer, to investigate further and inwards and down that rabbit hole. In one of what I think is one of the best horror movies ever made, The Witch, there are a few sneaky rabbit scenes. There's one where the father and the son are in the forest hunting a rabbit, and when he goes to shoot the rabbit, the gun backfires, and it's almost like the rabbit caused it. And it's very creepy. I think this is most likely a callback to the belief that witches turned into rabbits in that time period. But again, this rabbit is signifying that the supernatural is unearthing to reality now, and you have these witches roaming around hunting this family. It is a warning, and it appears at thresholds where reality is bending. And famously, David Lynch's short film Rabbits uses them as unsettling characters in a really dreamlike and creepy setting where it doesn't make a whole lot of obvious sense. So because the dialogue in this makes no sense, I think it's really important that they're rabbits and that they are dressed so normally in such a hyper normal setting with a camera that doesn't move. It is almost like the rabbits are talking like their subconscious minds, and they're not making a lot of sense because they have different perspectives on stuff. And it's just a really weird and unsettling short film, but I think it is so important that they're bunnies. And this is somehow the most poignant example of the rabbits in media to me, because somehow it encapsulates all of our rabbit folklore and symbolism and the threshold of reality, because it turns a focus on the underbelly of our minds and the creepy yet a little mysterious and mischievous energy that the rabbit gives off just by being a rabbit. So those are my thoughts on rabbits with a little bit of research that I did. They're not all my ideas. I think personally they're really creepy. And I don't know why, because they're so cute. Like, so it is interesting. It's like, as a collective species, like, we've all decided this, it feels like. But if you've watched this far, thank you for being here and thanks for watching. And I hope you have a really good night or a really good day. Don't get scared. And I'd love to hear a horror movie with bunny symbolism that you love, because there's a lot more than what I talked about. A lot more. I'm so excited to see the back rooms. This happens to be my birthday month because I'm a Taurus, bless up. And it also happens to be the month where there's so many good horror movies coming out all the time. I think it's just like a summer thing. Like in May, they all come out. So I'm very excited for back rooms. I'm very excited for Obsession. Obsession better be fucking good, because that director, I think, is doing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre A24 movie, which I hate every Texas Chainsaw Massacre spinoff except for one. So like, I want something a little bit good. Okay, peace and love you so much. Bye.